Hello, I'm Gordon Brewer, and welcome to the Practice of Therapy podcast, where we explore the business and clinical sides of running a private practice. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the podcast. This is episode number 212 of the Practice of Therapy podcast, and I'm Gordon Brewer. Glad you've joined me, and if this is your first time listening to the podcast, welcome, and if you're coming back for more, glad you're back and glad you're with us, and be sure to take time to subscribe to the podcast or follow us wherever you might be listening. So I'm excited for you to hear my guest today. I was going back and listening to the original recording when typically my process for getting the podcast out every week is that I'll record and then I'll go back and do the intro and outro later on. But I was going back and listening to this, and this is such a great episode. And I'm interviewing a person by the name of Avivit Fisher. And Avivit comes to kind of our field as really a person that had struggled in finding the right clinician for her in her own trauma and that sort of thing. And she's got a marketing background. And so she shares with us kind of what she learned through her own experience and how she has kind of turned that into a niche for herself and helping clinicians market in such a way that people can find you and that you resonate with them. The other thing too that we talk about in this episode, which I think is so timely, particularly where we are right now. Here we are, as this episode is coming out, January of 2022. We're still in the throes of the COVID pandemic, and one of the things about kind of a silver lining that I've mentioned with other episodes is that there are a lot of people seeking mental health services. And one of the phenomenon that a lot of us are experiencing is that our practices are full. And so we think of of marketing as not being something that's really on the forefront for us because we've got plenty of business, so to speak. But one of the things that Avivit reminded me of is how well are we doing with our messaging and being able to connect with clients? Another part of this that is coming out kind of into the news as this episode is coming out is the No Secrets Act, which is for those of us on insurance panels is going to affect the way that we communicate with clients on the front end. And so anyway, in this episode, we talk about all of that, and we talk about how we need to maybe think about marketing our practices a little bit differently, or how we're at least messaging to our clients on the front end. So stay tuned for my conversation with Avivit Fisher, and I think you're going to enjoy this one. But before we get to Avivit, I'd love for you to find out more about the upcoming webinar that I've got. Doing another live webinar with my good friend David Hall, Dr. David Hall. And we're just going to be talking in this particular webinar about some of the ways in which people can level up or really take their practice to the next level, whatever that might be. And typically, for a lot of folks, it might be that you're a solo practitioner and you're wanting to start a group, or maybe even you already have a group practice and you're trying to think of ways to kind of get yourself to the next level. So if you'll go to practiceoftherapy.com/group, you can find out more about that free webinar that's going to occur on January the 21st, and love to have you. And even if you're not able to attend that day, if you'll be sure and sign up anyway so that you can get the the recording of it if you're not able to attend the live webinar. The advantage to being in the live webinar is you get to ask your questions, and I think that's a lot can be learned from people's questions. So anyway, again, go check it out at practiceoftherapy.com/group. And before we get to Avivit and my conversation with her, I'd love for you to hear more from our sponsor of the podcast, TherapyNotes. You know, in running a private practice, you need to have excellent systems and processes in place. And one of the leading electronic health record systems that you need to check out is TherapyNotes. They're who I use in my practice. TherapyNotes provides a patient portal, also the ability to schedule online, send appointment reminders, also handle your collections, insurance claims. It's all in one platform for the clinical side of your practice. And they also have telehealth available through their platform. As I said, they are who I use in my practice and couldn't do without them. So be sure and check them out. Go to practiceoftherapy.com/therapynotes and you'll be able to see what they have available. And also be sure and use the promo code Gordon, just GORDON, and you can try them out for 2 months for free. That's TherapyNotes at practiceoftherapy.com/therapynotes. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome again to the podcast. And I'm so happy to have with me Avivit Fisher. And hopefully I didn't butcher your name too much.
No, it was perfect.
Well, good. So, Avivit, glad you're with me.
Yeah, me too. I'm very happy to be here.
Yes, glad we got in touch. And one of the things that I know Avivit and I are going to be talking about, and I'm excited for this conversation, is just how maybe marketing has changed given the environment we're in post-COVID, and we're still in COVID. I mean, that's I don't know if we'll ever get to a place where we can say post-COVID, but anyway, Avivit, as I start with everyone, why don't you tell folks a little bit about your journey and how you got interested in this niche?
Sure. It's quite the story. So I come from the client side and my story really started in 2015. I lived in an apartment building with my family in New Jersey that burned down. So there was a huge fire and the building burned down to the ground. And my family, together with 200 other apartment owners or renters, lost everything in the fire. So it was about over 1,000 people that we lost everything. All our belongings, our clothes, our, documents, everything. My son was 2.5 years old at the time. We lost even our dog. And it was a very traumatic process. And I remember from that time that the community where I lived really mobilized and was very helpful with, immediate needs like clothes, like even money. And there were some representatives from the Red Cross that sort of checked in on our well-being, but there was nobody there from the mental health field really to direct us to get the help that we needed. And I got to say that it was a process, because in the beginning it was such a shock that I was not ready to talk to anybody. And I'm sure that I wasn't alone in that. I was not ready to talk to anybody. I really needed to get my, life in order. But after that, it was a process of, there was a legal process. We were talking to lawyers. There was a process that we went through with the management of the building. And throughout this process, nobody had recommended us to any mental health provider. Moreover, it was a big story in our area in New Jersey, and nobody reached out to us. So, our information of the tenants of this building was public. And it took me about a year to find the right therapist. It took me about a year to really understand that what I'm going through is not something that I can deal with on my own. that I really need help. And I was, I was looking online. It was 2015. And so I was looking online for things, very specific things, like how to deal emotionally with a house fire, what to do. And there was nothing really that I could find. And then I saw, that there's a big gap between how therapists present themselves and what people are actually searching for. And I had already, I was working as a marketer already with service businesses, but I really saw a big opportunity to help a lot of people using my skills as a, business consultant, as a marketing consultant, and helping therapists create the right message and really bridge the communication gap between people who need help and between service providers. So this is how I started focusing on really working with private practice owners.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that story. I mean, that's, I can only imagine just what that must have been like going through such a traumatic event for your life, and how you've kind of, we're fortunate to have people like you that kind of point out what is needed by people and how to better communicate to people on the front end, as far as, reaching people that are looking for our help as therapists. So, yeah. So thanks for sharing that. That's incredible.
Yes, of course. And I don't see myself as unique in this type of situation. People go through traumatic events all the time, natural disasters, fires, floods, and things like that people really do need support after that. And it's a very specific event that not everybody can relate. It's not like COVID when everybody is in the same sort of boat. It's a very isolated experience. Right. So, yeah.
Yeah. It's just not to get too far off on a tangent, but I know just as we're recording this, this is in December. We're recording in December of 2021, and we've just recently had a major disaster here, not too far from me in Mayfield, Kentucky, with the tornadoes and all of that. And just, I know my heart goes out to folks like that. And those are folks that are going to need to process and really kind of deal with that terrible loss.
Absolutely.
Well, not to minimize this story by any means, but as you have worked with therapists around their marketing, what is it? Kind of walk us through your process of what we need to be thinking about in just marketing our practices, and then I want us to kind of maybe segue into what you've learned now just with people. I know in my own practice, we're full. So marketing is not something that's necessarily on our radar as much right now. But anyway, just take us through your process.
Sure. So I thought that the most important thing that needed to be discussed from a marketing perspective was messaging. And I'm not unique in saying that. I know that a lot of people. So really understanding the ideal client who you're talking to, or just a wider audience that you want to address. And also try to talk in a language that people are using. And that's a very important thing, because from, the language on the website to the language in, in social media posts, it needs to be relatable, because you're not talking to another group of private practice owners. Like you might be, but they're not the clients that you want to attract. So that was very, very important for me. When I started working with my clients, I think there's a lot of, there needed to be a lot of education around, the mindset of the person who's looking for therapy and how they're looking and the journey that they're going through to looking for therapy. And I usually explain well, and ask my clients to map out the process. Well, how is this person finding you? Which stages are they looking for? What are they looking for when they're Googling something? What kind of questions they're asking? Just like me, when I was looking about information dealing with mentally with fire, with a house fire. This is a very specific question. So I think that messaging is the number one priority for marketing, especially in such a busy world that we live in. And there's just information is everywhere and screaming to everyone. And trying to minimize the jargon use, professional jargon use, and understand that people do not self-diagnose. So people who go through a traumatic experience don't really know that it's trauma a lot of times. I didn't know. And so you kind of have to meet them where they are. And this is the goal of marketing, I think.
Right. Yeah, I love that, because I think, in our training as therapists, we're particularly in graduate school, we're kind of taught this language of kind of research and in this, like you said, the professional jargon. And I think sometimes we take for granted the fact that most people just don't talk that way about what they're experiencing internally. And so being able to kind of put words to people's internal experience in a way that doesn't sound so clinical and so so kind of removed from things. It's funny because I'm reminded of a client that I had here recently. As we're talking about with COVID, they had been infected with the virus and actually had been on a ventilator for a while, and just is really having a lot of trouble health-wise with the post-COVID symptoms that a lot of people are having, and just not really getting back to where they were. But when I framed it with this particular client in terms of trauma, it made a whole lot much more sense to them, and that they have experienced a loss, and what they're going through now and just trying to find a new normal in their life made sense. So in just thinking about marketing, here post-COVID or in the middle of COVID or the pandemic or whatever we want to call it, that's a universal, that to some degree, that's a universal experience. But like you said, Avivit, there are lots of trauma situations that people don't think about it in terms of necessarily being trauma, but yet they're experiencing trauma. And in your example, having a house fire is one.
Exactly. And people don't understand what they're going through, but they understand that they feel bad and they express it in their own way. So, for me, for example, I'm just going to give a little example, not that I want to talk about myself all the time, but I was at the stage like I would look in the mirror and not recognize the person that's looking back at me. So it was a very specific feeling. I wouldn't have been able to label it as anything because I'm not a professional, but I was looking for answers to address that. And it's an important thing to keep in mind. Right.
Yeah. That's an important thing that you're right to keep in mind. So, well, to change, to kind of switch gears here a little bit, I know one of the things we were talking about before we started recording is just this phenomenon that we're experiencing in our practices. I think for a lot of us is that we're getting very busy, and that there's the potential for burnout, and also just knowing how to say no to all the influx of new clients that we're getting. You're right. As we were talking ahead of time, marketing has kind of fallen off the radar, but I think we need to kind of think about that long term. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of that.
So my observation, and it's interesting, my observation of the whole private practice field when it comes to mental health services is that, things are not going to slow down. So practitioners will not be able to sort of balance out the year with the slower months when they have very busy months. So because the demand is is there and it's growing, you're going to keep on being busy. And it's very important to understand your process of work and really automate as much as possible of the non-billable tasks to sort of, I wouldn't say avoid, but at least minimize the possibility of burnout. So to give you an example of what I mean, I recently have been working with a client who's, she's not a therapist, she's a pediatric neuropsychologist. So she doesn't provide therapy, but right now she has a lot of clients that need her services. And one of the problems that she's been having is a lot of back and forth communication with clients or potential clients or new clients and everything. And we sat down and we looked at her process. And we said, okay, well, you don't need new clients. So marketing doesn't need to, your goal in marketing doesn't need to be attracting new clients, but you can use marketing to create a smoother process for you to communicate with the client. So in other words, she needed to redesign her website, for example, to facilitate this communication so it's more automated and requires less of her time and involvement of answering the same questions over and over again, for example, or scheduling, or taking people sort of by the hand and saying, well, I need this documentation, I need you to answer these types of questions. So things like that can be automated, and there are marketing tools out there that you can use. So it's very important right now to actually look at the process of your work and use marketing tools to make your work simpler, like all these non-billable tasks, everything that has to do with communication, with billing, with scheduling, with promoting yourself, your message on social media, because you still have to, you don't have to, but it's good to promote your message because you can help a wider audience of people, those who maybe are not ready for therapy right now. Mm-hmm. So you can use marketing tools this way. And
right. That's funny that you bring that up, because in the mastermind group that I'm part of with some other private practice consultants and therapists, we were talking about that, just about just our intake processes and that sort of thing. And being able to communicate on your website the steps for doing an intake with a particular practice, because you're right. One of the things that can eat up a lot of time for folks is just getting people onboarded with them to start therapy. And that takes a lot of time. And that's one of the things that I really encourage people to do, is once you get really busy and your practice gets full, to try to outsource that or automate that process as much as possible. Just because it can eat up a whole lot of time, fielding phone calls and answering people's questions and that sort of thing. But in nowadays, I sound like an old fogey here, which I probably am, but people are going to look online and try to find the answers to their questions there first without necessarily calling. So you're exactly right. I think that's a form of marketing, is they're going to pick the people that give the best information, I think.
Yeah, that exactly. And they also need to familiarize themselves quicker with a therapist, with a service provider. They need to relate to that person, right? So, and there's so many ways to do that. There's so much innovation that's happening in the mental health field right now. There's a lot of money that being given by the government, and there's a lot of new startups that are coming up with new ideas, to make things easier between the client and the provider. And the things are changing very, very fast, at a fast pace. Mm-hmm. And it's good to keep on top of it and see what's happening out there and see how you can really participate in this innovation as well. And it's very easy to get into this same process of taking in as many clients as possible, and that doesn't leave you the time to think about innovations within your own business or new ideas of how to do provide therapy maybe in a way that you can help more people without it consuming all of you. So.
Right. Yeah, it's being able to move from the kind of the paradigm of one-to-one kind of interaction with people to the one-to-many, and being able to figure out ways to do that. I know I've had previous conversations on other episodes with people just about the importance of diversifying your income within your practice. And, one way of doing that is to start a group practice where you bring on more clinicians, but that's a whole other problem now, just being able to find clinicians to hire for a group practice, because there's such a shortage right now of mental health providers. But so it's just really a lot of changing paradigms around being in practice. And I'm kind of getting excited just thinking about this stuff of one of the things too that I think there's being a shift is that, at least when I was coming along in graduate school, you were kind of encouraged to get your degree and get your licensure, then go work for an agency somewhere. But now the shift is definitely moving more towards private practice and people operating more independently and not necessarily in an agency setting, where they do have control of their schedules and do have control of the types of clients they get and all of that sort of thing. So, what are you noticing about all of that as well?
Well, I think it's absolutely right to be excited on your part, because I think that, there's such a high demand right now. I think that there's a bigger understanding of the importance of mental health and the help that's needed, and on all levels, on corporate levels, on governmental levels, private sector. It's an incredibly exciting time from a perspective of providing help to people, because people are much more open to accept it. We're going through this collective experience, that we can all relate to. And, the thing is that private practitioners, like your education, your experience is such an asset, because it takes years to become a therapist. Like it takes years to be able to practice. I think that there can be a lot of opportunities. There can be a lot of opportunities in the corporate world. There can that you don't necessarily have to think only about a one-on-one client. Maybe it can be in a bigger setting. Maybe it can be training people on certain things. I'm not saying something very serious, but most people right now, I think that the biggest increases in the levels of anxiety and depression. That's what I've been reading. That's what I understand overall. Correct me if I'm wrong. So I think it's something that can be addressed in different formats. It can be addressed online. It can be addressed through working with corporations, through working with certain organizations, through training others, maybe on certain things. I'm not an expert in that. I don't necessarily know specific things that are possible for you to train others with, but I'm assuming that, and from what I'm seeing from my clients, that is possible. You just need to step back and examine the trends that you've been seeing in the past year. With your clients, from your colleagues, and putting the business cap on and figuring out how you can fit in those opportunities that are arising everywhere.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, and it just one big example of that is just how much doing kind of online Zoom, FaceTime, Google Meet, all of those kinds of things has become really the norm to some degree in just the way we interact face to face.
Yeah.
I'm still I still prefer actual human contact, but I mean, this is it's very doable and it's very effective in doing things in this way. And so I think that's something that's been a huge learning curve for a lot of therapists and a lot of us, but we did it successfully. And I think I would say at least a third. But prior to COVID, I was nearly 100% face to face, in person
Mhm.
therapy. And now, even though our COVID numbers are kind of going down, although they keep going back and up and down, but at least a third of my practice is online now. So, um,
Yeah.
and I don't think that's going away.
Yeah, no, it's definitely not going to go away. I mean, some clients I know that are harder to work online, like little children, for example,
Mm-hmm.
probably. Couples are probably harder to work with like this because you can kind of need to see them together.
Mm-hmm.
But for a lot of clients, it's very not only doable, but it's necessary. I
Mm-hmm.
myself was going to therapy and I had little children. And I've been working with my therapist online way before COVID started
Mm-hmm.
because it was just more convenient. It was just more
Right.
accessible to me.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And I would say, even for me as a therapist, I have a therapist, and all of that's done. They're in another city here in Tennessee,
yeah.
and so it just makes sense. So yeah, so a lot of huge changes over the last 2 years with all of this. So, well, Avivit, I want to be respectful of your time. What sort of closing thoughts do you have just around this whole topic of managing our practices and marketing and all of this sort of thing?
Well, I actually talk a lot about it and on social media and my website as well. About the fact that you kind of need to allow yourself to have the space to examine your day-to-day activities and your process of working, and to see, especially right now with the potential of burning out being so high, you need to let yourself analyze it a little bit and improve the processes of your everyday practice management. It is also very important to sort of step up and evolve with the situation because one of my biggest, the biggest things that I'm kind of worried about is people who are not professionals or experts in mental health are stepping up, are amplifying the message and sending the message of trying to help people. And I just don't want non-experts to take the space of the experts, specifically online.
Exactly. Yeah.
And yeah, and I think that it's very important to prepare yourself and to
Yeah.
understand things are not going to go back to the way they were. This
Mm-hmm.
is a big shift. Things are changing, and you kind of need to adapt to that. And there are so many tools that allow you to automate, to simplify things. The people are ready. People have shifted to buying products and services online in the past couple of years more than before. So
Right.
people are ready. The audience is there.
Right. Right. And you speak to another topic that we could spend probably another hour on, and that's just the kind of the phenomenon of tech companies taking over the behavioral health kind of fields. And it's there's I know I've had recently a discussion about this with my good friends Kelly and Miranda from ZennyMe
Yeah.
about this, and I know we're going to be I know there's going to be more conversation about that and whether whether that's a good thing or not. So, but anyway, so Avivit, thanks again for being on the podcast. Tell folks how to get in touch with you and how they can find out about your resources.
Oh, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's been really a pleasure, great conversation. You can find me on my website, which is Red Strategy with the 2 Ds. I have a lot of useful tools and resources there, free resources, and I actually have a whole guide of sort of a step-by-step guide to starting creating a thriving practice to reduce burnout. So you're welcome to use it. And I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram, as you know, we connected on Instagram. And my email, avivit@redstrategy.com. If you have any questions about marketing and business skills, I'm happy to answer them. It's always such a pleasure to connect with therapists.
Good. And we'll have links here in the show notes and the show summary for people to access it very easily. Well, Avivit, I'm so glad we got to know each other, and hopefully we can get you back on again. Well, I don't know about you, but I just loved my conversation with Avivit, and the topics that we covered, I think, are just so important and so much so there's so much there that we need to be thinking about here, and just all the changes that are going on here as a result of the COVID pandemic and just the demands and changing economy and all of that sort of thing. Our profession is changing, folks, and I think we need to pay attention to that, particularly something that we kind of alluded to here at the end of our interview is just the really kind of the phenomenon of tech companies getting into the mental health business. And I'm speaking of things like Talkspace and BetterHelp and folks like that. And I'm not don't want to place too much judgment on that. But one of the things about it is that if we don't take ownership of our own professions and our own way of doing things, as Avivit said, one of the things is that we've got to be more proactive as a profession, as professionals, as the experts in our field, and kind of driving how people receive services. And so, because we're living in an online world, and I think that that's something that we're going to have to continue to flesh out. So not to go too far down our rabbit hole, but again, big thanks to Avivit for being on the podcast. Be sure and check out her things in the links here in the show notes and the show summary. I hope that Avivit can come back on the podcast before long, because she's very knowledgeable and she's really got a great perspective on what we do day in and day out in our practices. So be sure and check her out. And her website is redstrategy.com, and that's REDD strategy.com. So be sure and check that out. And also, we've got the upcoming webinar on getting your practice to the next level, or getting your thinking about that. And I'll be doing that in conjunction with my friend, Dr. David Hall. And you can find out more about that at practiceoftherapy.com/group. And be sure and sign up for that free webinar, and hope you'll join us for that. I think it's every time we've done this webinar, and we're tweaking it a little bit each time, we've just gotten a lot of great responses from people and just a lot of great questions, and people seem to find it helpful. So be sure and check it out, practiceoftherapy.com/group, to find out more about that. And also, as always, big thank you to our sponsor, TherapyNotes. And you can find out more about them by going to practiceoftherapy.com/TherapyNotes. They are the leading electronic health record system for mental health providers. They're who I use in my practice and couldn't do without them. Been very thrilled with what they provide, and their support is second to none. They're very responsive. So be sure and check them out, practiceoftherapy.com/therapynotes. And as always, thanks for joining me for the podcast, and do take time to follow us wherever you might be listening to your podcasts, and be sure and share it with your friends so they can find out about it. Looking forward to this new year. And by the way, before I close out completely here, one of the things I want to kind of announce is that I've got a new podcast that'll be coming out in February. And you can find out a little bit about that by going to kindnessandcompassion.com. And that's the new podcast that I'm partnering with my colleague Kayla Tapia on, and we're doing our initial recordings of the initial episodes right now. And it's a podcast that's going to be about how to use the practices of kindness and compassion in your life to be happier and to be more content in life. We're discussing topics around the intersection of science and psychology and spirituality and how all of that is making a difference in people's lives. And so I'm real excited for this new venture. And so you can check that out by going to kindnessandcompassion.com. So, and I'll let you know when it fully launches, but you can listen to the trailer if you'll go to that URL. So take care, folks, and we'll look forward to talking to you next week. You have been listening to the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer, part of the PsychCraft network of podcasts. Please visit us at practiceoftherapy.com for more information, resources, and tools to help you in starting, building, and growing your private practice. And if you haven't done so already, please sign up to receive the free Private Practice Startup Guide at practiceoftherapy.com. The information in this podcast is intended to be accurate and authoritative concerning the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, or producers are rendering legal, accounting, or clinical advice. If you need a professional, you should find the right person for that.